Hello and welcome back, adventurers. This is Captain TTRPG, and today we're talking about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Hello, adventurers. Today we look specifically at the Munitions Master Class Archetype. Gee, why is that, Captain TTRPG? Is it because you forgot to add it to your Class Archetype catch-up video? Why, certainly not. It's just a massive coincidence that that's the case. Yeah, so that, but also because I feel I should explain a bit about siege weapons, go into a little more depth, because you need to know a little bit more to play this class archetype, and it would be a lot to add into an already very long video that last one was. So, here we go. But as usual, before we get in, I don't want to leave anybody behind here, so criteria time, I'll try to be brief. S is a subclass that is clearly mechanically stronger for combat than other subclasses, while not falling behind other pillars of play. It's the, hey, this is the right way to play the class kind of subclass, and that applies to class archetypes too. A is just solid, strong, feels good in any adventure, takes advantage of the fact that this is a team-based game, and really doesn't have any flaws, but a lot of strengths. B is a subclass that is mechanically strong on its own, or could do a good job of boosting up the party, but it really doesn't do both. And it might play better in some campaigns than others, but it's usually fairly campaign agnostic. C is a subclass that lands here because it's just not that strong in combat, really in any campaign. There might be like one very specific kind of campaign that it fits in, but really nothing else. Or at least it's no better than just kind of the class without a subclass at all. It might not take advantage of the specialties of what the class is really meant to do. And D is a trap. You avoid this, it's a trap. Don't take it. So what is the Munitions Master all about? As an Inventor Class Archetype, it is going to provide you both the subclass, or innovation, and of course, your dedication for an archetype all together. You get the dedication at level 2. In this case, the innovation we get happens to be a siege weapon, specifically the light mortar, which means we need to talk a little bit more about siege weapons, because they aren't like normal weapons. So normal weapon, like single action, strike, melee means just be within 5 feet, ranged, great, you can be all sorts of distances, they have ranged values. We've talked all about weapons, you guys all know about weapons. Nobody's questioning that. However, in siege weapons, things are quite a bit different. Yes, these are weapons. Sometimes they're just too big to move at all, sometimes they're big but can be moved around. They generally take more than one person to operate. Besides that, the types of siege weapons break down into 2 categories, which are mounted and portable. These are the new siege weapons added, by the way, because we also have the black powder siege weapons. Anyway, I'm talking about the newer ones that came out in Battle Cry. Mounted weapons, which is what the light mortar is, require actions to aim, load, and launch, though different crewmates can accomplish various tasks at different times on their turns. Aim takes 1 or more actions, and you'll take aim at a single square for single target siege weapons, or the corner of a square for a burst, or a direction for a line or a cone. The load activity takes 1 or more actions, and sometimes requires that you take some sort of skill action or roll some sort of D20 test in order to complete it, so you can't fail at loading it. And then finally, you launch for 1 action. They all launch for 1 action. As long as all the other activities have been completed, you can do this. And of course, it's going to go after whatever area was aimed at previously. Then there is moving, which normally requires 2 actions and the help of a readied action from a whole bunch of crew members. The side of the crew is listed for the siege weapon, but that won't always be true, like in the case of our light mortar. Then we've got all of the stats for a siege weapon. We've got, AC, HP, hardness, saving throws, immunities, weaknesses, resistances, crew size, uses, actions for aim, load, all these lovely things. There's just a lot going on with siege weapons. Thankfully, though, we don't need to worry about a whole lot of that with this class archetype. No, we really only care about the light mortar, and therefore the very minimal set of that applies to the light mortar. For taking the Munitions Master class archetype, you are forced to take the light mortar as your innovation. Aside from usual stats, which I'll show here on screen, but I'm not going to talk through all of it. First, when deployed, it's going to take an action. So you don't just get to deploy it for free, but it takes 1 action, but at least not 2 actions. Also, the damage it deals increases by a damage die at level 5 and every 4 levels after that. So it is going to go up in damage over time on its own. This is to make up for the fact that you aren't going to be able to put the normal striking runes and such on it. The reflex saved required by enemies in the area of the blast is your Inventor DC rather than a standard for the siege weapon, which is great. And this is also used, by the way, for your AC. So you have a little more survivability for your light mortar if it happens to get targeted. It has hardness 5, is trained somehow in fortitude and reflex saves, and you use your intelligence modifier for the calculations when you go ahead and roll the saves. Keep in mind that will saves aren't listed because how are you affecting the will of a light mortar? I don't know. Anyway, you're not going to get affected, your mortar's not going to get affected by will save concerns. It gets decent hit points with 10 plus 2 plus your int times your level. Anyway, nice little calculation there. And its broken threshold is half the hit points. Its hardness and saving proficiencies go up, but not as quickly as you might like. As you can see in the stat block, it is a martial weapon. It needs only one crew, you, and it can be moved 20 feet at a time. Aim only takes one action, but you have to move the target location, or you can only move the target location 10 feet. It also takes only one action to reload, and finally, of course, one to launch. It does take one action to deploy, like I mentioned, so just keep that in mind. The damage is a 10-foot burst with a 120-foot range increment, which is good distance, that deals 2d6 bludgeoning damage to those that have to make a basic reflex save. But it's an innovation, which means modifications. There are 3 possible modifications at level 1. Contained shrapnel, you choose to launch it. You can make it non-lethal or not with every single launch, so if you don't want it to kill the enemies, just knock them all out, you could. Enhanced shrapnel, this gives the versatile P and S, meaning piercing and slashing, options when you launch, so you can do other than just bludgeoning. And spring-loaded, which is a deploy this as a free action, which is what I would probably gravitate to, because I don't want to spend an action to deploy it. Your overdrive adds damage to the mortar blasts, and explode action is around your mortar, but it doesn't hit you, so it won't affect your mortar and it won't affect you, just everything else around the both of you. You get inventive expertise, which raises your class DC to expert at level 7 instead of 9, which is when inventors normally get it, and you get the following breakthrough modifications at 7 as well. We've got blanching chamber, your blasts count as cold iron and silver for triggering weaknesses. Then we've got earth breaker, you choose each launch, whether to use it or not, and you deal only half damage, but the area becomes difficult terrain. And finally, narrow blast. Each launch, you can choose a 20-foot cone originating from the mortar instead of your usual 10-foot area. I have to say it's kind of a hard call on this one here. Depends on the campaign. I'd probably take blanching chamber if I thought cold iron or silver was ever going to come up. Narrow blast is just 20-foot cone is not that long. I don't know that I'd be doing that, and dealing half damage but causing difficult terrain sounds great, except for keep in mind this is a 10-foot burst, so it's not like a 30-foot burst where the difficult terrain would be meaningful. It's very, very small. At 9th level, your offensive boost adds to your mortar damage. So this is where you get to add a 1d6 normally to your attacks. That could be of various types of damage. Now you'll add it to your mortar. Then at 15, your class DC goes to Master, and rather than having to wait for level 17 for that, and you get your revolutionary modifications. We've got enhanced damage. This is something that weapons also get if you've got the weapon innovation. It just increases the damage die by 1 step, so instead of d6s, they're all d8s. Then we've got impossible alloy. This makes your blasts count as all sky metals, which includes things like adamantine and orichalcum. So again, for triggering weakness. And precise blast. This time, you choose squares up to your intelligence modifier that are in the blast area and exclude them from the blast area, so you don't have to hit your allies, which is nice. Honestly, I'd probably, again, if I could trigger a lot of weaknesses, I'd take that. The damage die increase isn't bad, because by this point, you're probably doing, 5 or 6 d6s, so turning those all into d8s, it's a whole 6 damage increase on average, but it's something. It's not terrible. All of these, I think, are relatively decent choices. So, you get all of that from the archetype itself. I'll admit, when I read it, though, I was a little disappointed. Some of the modifications feel really kind of necessary, at least to me, but that's because I don't like to waste actions, so spring-loaded is probably the most obvious one. As we get higher up, I think they vary a little bit more in value. And you're still dealing with all 3 actions every round. right? You have to aim, you have to load, and you have to launch every single round. That's all your actions counted for, which means no options, no tactics, nothing else in the Inventor matters. You're just doing that. Thankfully, though, we still haven't talked about the dedication and all of the feats available that come with having to have a class archetype. And in this case particular, the dedication is very, very important. The dedication lets you aim and either reload or launch for one action. This can only be used once per turn, but suddenly you have one freed up action every round. Thankfully, that makes a big difference. So at level 1, this is going to hurt a lot, and at level 2, it'll hurt slightly less. Then we have our available feats. We have Focused Fire. This is level 4, takes one action. You launch your mortar at a single square. It deals one additional damage die. So if you just have one target you want to hit, because there's no grouped up enemies, this is actually a nice little damage boost. We have Wrapped in Smoke, level 4, one action. You create a cloud of smoke in a 5-foot emanation around your mortar. This causes concealment. Everybody inside is concealed from those outside. Everybody outside is concealed those from within. But because it's a mortar and you know where people still are for firing things off on them and you're not actually attacking, you can still blast them, but they're going to have a challenge targeting you. Then we have Field Artillery. This is level 6, one action, requires Expert in Crafting. You can interact with one mounted siege weapon to increase its speed by 10 feet for a round. You're going to use an action to make it go less than double speed to move it around. Or you could have just, spent 2 actions to go 40 feet instead of 2 actions to go 30 feet, but you do you. Then we have Siege Celerity. This is level 6. It's a free action, but it has the Unstable trait. When your turn begins, you can become quickened to either load or launch your mortar, but still you can only launch one time per turn, which sounds amazing until you remember that the Unstable trait means you have to roll a d20, a flat check after this, and unless you succeed at a DC 15 flat check, you won't be using any other unstable actions the entire combat. And you need a 10-minute rest after that. Recoiling Relocation, level 8, also a free action, also unstable. When you are adjacent to your mortar and you just launched it, you use this free action to propel you and the mortar up to the mortar's speed in any direction, and you have to land adjacent to each other. It's this bizarre fling yourself around the battlefield thing, which sounds really fun and cool, but again, unstable action, so not ideal. Yeah. Then we have Burrowing Shot at level 10. This is one action. You launch your mortar, but you deal only half damage to creatures in the area, but you deal double damage to structures and objects. So if you need to destroy a wall, this is how you do it. And finally, Master Siege Engineer at level 16. You are now permanently quickened, the extra action being used to aim or launch a siege weapon. That is actually worth having. And there we go. Those are all the feats. So how does all of this compare to the subclasses we've already looked at? Well, it obviously adds a very different dimension. This is a constant AoE damage thing, which is interesting. Siege weapons are cumbersome, though. And at level 1, it's, in my book, basically unplayable. Requiring all 3 actions from you each turn just to make one shot, you can't move or anything, is just awful. And if you don't have the spring-loaded modification, you lose your action that first round to even set it up. So unless you go in knowing where everything's going on, you're not surprised by combat or whatever, and you can set up beforehand, you're not even firing that first round. I mean, you probably are because you probably had it loaded beforehand if your GM lets you, but anyway, it's still a problem. The feats, some of which are interesting, but not necessarily in a good way. What we have here, in my opinion, is a kind of a sandwich of good feats, meaning some of the really early ones, some of the level 4s are actually pretty good. Concealment's good. The extra damage die against a single target's good. Those are nice. And then a bunch of garbage in the middle with 2 unstable functions and a couple of feats I wouldn't take unless I absolutely had to. And then at the other end, Master Siege Engineer, which is amazing and basically necessary if you can get a hold of it, because that suddenly gives you 2 free actions per turn to do something else. The truth be told, this is probably going to feel like a very limiting playstyle. The AoE damage is really not that bad. Like, it goes up at a decent rate, and the fact that you're consistently pumping out AoE damage, yeah, that's not terrible. It's a small area, but at least it's something. But that's all you're going to be able to do because of the restrictive nature And it doesn't let you lean into the other things that inventors can do. If I'm going to use my unstable trait, I'm going to use it for something crazy and cool, not for something like a free action. And all that free action does is make it feel like at least I'm able to finally truly play an inventor and not just somebody who triggers a small AoE every round. It's just kind of disappointing. It's not terrible, but it's kind of like playing a spellcaster where all you can do is constantly trigger off cantrip after cantrip every round and nothing else. There's no versatility to it. It's the same cantrip, but this doesn't even have cool effects on top of that. It's just, yeah, it's like if you had a kineticist that all they did was make the tiniest AoE fire explosion every round. It wouldn't be very satisfying, and that's what this is. It's just not satisfying. It loses identity of the inventor. Maybe there's some, world in which it's the right fit for a campaign, but honestly, this is a C for me. And it's sad because there's so much that went into this. I think that some really good feats could have saved this potentially. Something to extend out the area of the siege damage. I'd love to be dropping out a fireball-sized siege every time. Granted, I'll hit my allies a lot, but I can take a feat to reduce that. Something to make it feel more viable than it currently does. Maybe some sort of control effects you can add on that are really strong other than, yay, I made some difficult terrain. Which again, if it was a big area, I'd still be excited about. Anyway, not exactly the most exciting note to end on here, but gotta add it in. It's a C, not my first take on the Inventor, a class that I absolutely love. There we go. A lot of explanation and detail to end up in a disappointing location. Still, finally, I do believe that I finally caught up, this time for real, probably. Was that helpful at all? Do you love the Munitions Master and think I completely underrated it? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and as always, adventure on.